absurd. There's God right in the clouds, Santa in the sky, white dude. All the biblical characters in the Bible, children's books, white people, even though they were in a part of the world where there are no white people, right? So even though we don't have that in our home, my child has nonetheless already at the age of 7 somehow internalized the idea that the creation source of the universe, whether taken in religious terms or humanistic and more naturalistic terms, is somehow closer to her than to Morgan Freeman. And if my daughter has internalized that, what do you think black and brown children internalize when they see the same imagery? And they see those images. They see them in the stained glass of our churches. You see them in the Christmas cards that get sent around every holiday season where baby Jesus is in the manger in what apparently is Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, rather than the other Bethlehem, right? Lily white Jesus, which makes no sense anthropologically, biologically, historically, makes no sense at all. But our children see those images and it can affect them. Now, if you were to try to break into my house and hurt my children, I would kill you without hesitation. I don't even have a gun, but I would find something and I would throw it at you and you would die. Like, it's just that simple. I would make sure that you died, right? If you were to try to hurt my kids. I'm not saying that because I'm a badass. I'm just saying, like, I'm just letting you know, like, don't mess with my children. But the problem, right? The problem is that there is something coming into that house. And it is hurting my children, and it's hurting all of our children, and it's hurting us, and I didn't even know it was there. See, the doors are locked at night, the windows are shut, the alarm is on, and whatever this thing is doesn't know the code, but the dirty little secret is it doesn't need to. It weasels its way into our children's brains and affects them. That's how I know that we've all ingested this poison, and we better own that if we're going to have an honest dialogue. It's not about feeling guilty about it. In fact, that's the beauty of it, right? If we've all been subjected to it, there's no reason to feel guilty.
Brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you're doing fine wherever you are today. As you usually know, this is a presenter, Ginger Stories, and I hope you're doing fine this festive season. Actually, I want to remind you before jumping right into the video that be more kinder this festive season and practice giving. It's important in this festive season. You see your brother in a problem, help them. You see somebody suffering, help them, because this is the season of giving. You know, you can go visit children's home. You can do a couple of things. It's important. It goes a long way, right? Now, today's video, this is something that I want to discuss. A couple of things I've been saying in my channel, and especially when I bring black professors to say these things, some of us black folks, we don't trust them. We don't believe them. Also, some white folks will say that, oh, you black supremacist. Oh, you know what, ABCD and all those stuff, right? Now today, I'm having a white professor who is going to say things that I've been saying, things that our black renowned professors have been saying for the longest time, but people don't care about them. Right? People are questioning them. But the same things, if a white person says or a white professor says, now people are taking them serious. And I feel like that's our problem. And now for you to believe what we are always trying to say, I want you to watch this video. Yes, I want you to watch this video. Don't judge me, because I'm only reacting to this video so that you and I can get to learn. Actually, what I'm doing is just facilitating everything which is happening, and it's upon you and I to learn through this video, because whatever this brother is going to say, it is the truth, and it is something that is embedded in the system of the United States, and it's time for us to get to learn all these problems. It gets us starting to know why did rain started beating us black people. Why is it that we are the most discriminated group of people in the world, right? So buckle up for this video. Is by this brother called Tim Wise. Most of you have seen him, most of you have known him. He has done a great job in talking about race issues in the United States and how there is huge disparity between the two groups. I hope this video serves you right wherever you are. This is presented Ginger Stories, and I'm hoping you learn a lot from it. Until then, let's dive right into the video. And if you're watching for the first time, kindly subscribe, join our membership, and really get to see what we can offer you. If you feel like you want to support us through a Cash App account, we'll most definitely appreciate. Go check it out on my bio. I'll most definitely appreciate. Let's jump right into it. I'll be back.
Because we could not have helped but ingest it. The question is, what do we do now? How do we take responsibility, which is not the same as guilt? Responsibility is what you take because of the kind of person you are. Guilt is what you feel for the stuff you've actually done. Those are two different things. We take responsibility for things even when we're not to blame for them. So that's the first piece. The second piece, the systemic piece, right? Our inability or our lack of willingness to admit that there's also a systemic element to racism, that it's not just about personal prejudice. If it were, it'd be so much easier, right? Because we could just educate people out of their biases, right? And we could somehow undo their personal stuff and everything would be fine. But there's a bigger problem, and it's systemic. It's the way that policies and practices and everyday procedures reinforce inequality between different racial groups, even if there's no overt bigotry in the room. What do I mean by that? Let me tell you a story to make that point. And it's a story about my own life. I am from the South. I grew up in Nashville, Tennessee. I've lived in the South all my life, 10 years in New Orleans, the rest of it in Nashville. 5 months in Houston, but we don't talk about that. No offense to Houston, I'm just saying. Like, there are reasons, and we will not discuss them. So growing up in Nashville, I went to school in public schools at a time when they had really just become truly integrated. That may seem sort of hard to believe because theoretically, right, the Supreme Court outlawed segregation back in 1954, but as was the case in Nashville, so too was it the case all throughout the South, that very few school systems actually moved toward real desegregation for about 20 years. So it was 1974, the year that I started first grade, that the school system in Nashville was actually truly integrated all the way down to the first grade level. And so by 1979-80, my fifth grade year, right, there were a lot of teachers in that system that had been in there for a really long time. Like, they had been teaching since the days of segregation, and they were the kind of people that really preferred the days of segregation, right? So they didn't like having to teach black kids now, but what they really didn't like was having to teach white kids who hung out with black kids. And that was me. See, I told you before, most of the time when we say we have black friends, we're lying. In my case, I pretty much didn't have anything but black friends for the first several years of school because I went to preschool at a historically black college when I was 3 years old. Tennessee State University early childhood ed program. So most of my peers were black kids. So when I got into public school, that's who I was hanging out with. That's who I played ball with. That's who I played on the playground with. That's who I sat in the cafeteria with. And there were teachers who not only didn't like the black kids, but really didn't like me, particularly because of my affinities, both culturally, linguistically, and artistically with black folks. These are the early days of hip hop, and I was that kid. Like, I was the white kid that hung out when we would have like rap battles, and I'm not gonna do that shit now because it would be tragic. But in those days, like 79, 80, you could be really bad at that in Nashville and you were still the best on the block, right? Because it was Nashville, it wasn't Brooklyn, it wasn't the Bronx, right? So the teachers really had a problem with who I hung out with and the music that I listened to and who my friends were. And there was one particular teacher, Mrs. Crownover, who was most offended by it. And so one day I get a report card, I have a D- in a reading class, which was what she taught, right? And my mom freaked out because reading was like the one thing I could do, right? If it was a math class, she would have totally not even blinked. She'd have been like, well, at least you didn't fail, you know? Good for you, you got it up from the F last time, you know? But in this particular case, I've been reading since I was like 2.5, right? So she sort of freaks out, she schedules a parent-teacher conference, she goes to talk to Ms. Crownover, and within about 30, 45 seconds, she realizes that grade had nothing to do with my actual effort, let alone my attitude, let alone my ability to read. It had to do with my social circle, because Ms. Crownover looks at my mom within the first minute of the meeting and says, any white parent that would send their kids to public school in this day and age, meaning an integrated day and age, obviously isn't fit to be a parent. They've lost their mind. This, by the way, is not what you want to say to my mother. So within a day or two, she organized with some other parents, and within 2 or 3 or 4 days, she had very directly and unceremoniously made sure that Mrs. Crownover was relieved of her income and her professional duties from there on out. She was forced into early retirement, as she should have been. So good for my mom. On the one hand, that's great. We got rid of the bigot. But remember, I told you it wasn't about individual bigots. It was about systems. And so here's the problem. Even as my mother took action, as she should have, to remove this racist from the classroom where she had no business teaching, right? But the problem was that after Ms. Crownover was gone, I went back into a school system that every day, in a very subtle but pernicious way, was sending the same kind of message that Mrs. Crownover was trying to send, which is white students are better, black students are lesser, and they shouldn't be together. How was the system sending that message? Very easy. By putting almost all the white kids in the honors and the advanced level classes, no matter what kind of students we were. I was a lousy student. I wasn't a good student till like last week. I literally got my shit together like Tuesday of last week, right? I wasn't a good student, but I was always in the honors track. And the black kids, no matter how bright they were almost always in the standard or the remedial level track and never moved up no matter how well they did. So the system was sending a message by dividing us and saying that it was division based on ability, but it wasn't. They were sending the message that Crownover was sending. They didn't even need her there to send it, you see. And my mother never saw that. And I never saw that. It went right over our heads. And that's not just a 1979 story. That continues to happen today. Right now in this country, students of color are half as likely to be placed in advanced placement and honors classes compared to white students. Students of color are half as likely to be taught by the most experienced teachers. White students twice as likely to have the most experienced teachers. Right? Black and Latino students 2, 3, even 4 times more likely to be suspended or expelled, even though they do not break the rules more often than white students. That's the belief, but it's not true. There have been 14 different studies. They all find the same thing, that the rates of serious school rule infractions are virtually identical across racial lines. People bringing drugs to campus, equally across racial lines. People bringing weapons to campus, actually white men more likely to bring guns and knives to campus in K-12 schools than black men or Latino men. Contrary to popular belief, but that's what the Centers for Disease Control research says. But who is it that's getting caught? It's black kids and Latino kids. They're the ones getting searched. They're the ones getting detected. They're the ones getting suspended and often prosecuted. Whereas white students are doing the same thing, doing drugs just as much, bringing weapons just as often, if not more so, and escaping notice. So that's still happening. That's a system, and it doesn't require one overt racist in the classroom for that to continue, right? So that becomes a problem. We have to do more than just look at the individual. We have to look at the way that structures operate, sometimes without us even realizing it's happening. Because if we don't do that, we can get rid of every individual bigoted cop or every individual bigoted teacher or any individual bigoted employer. We can sue them, I guess, in court, and maybe people can even win those lawsuits. But what does that really change unless we take aim at those institutional policies that keep recreating inequality? The third piece, our unwillingness to see how history affects the present, how the past and the present mix. We really don't like this. We really don't want to talk about this. And when I say we, I mean those of us called white especially. There are people of color who don't necessarily always want to engage it either, but especially those of us called white. We'll say things like this when people of color bring up racism. We'll say, well, why can't you just get over it? You know, all of that slavery stuff was a long time ago. In fact, Louis C.K. has this really funny bit, right, where he jokes about how white people have just moved the date of slavery further and further and further back. Like it used to be, slavery was 100 years ago, because it was. And then it was, slavery was 125 years ago, because it was. And now it should be, slavery was 150 years ago, but we'll actually say things like, that was hundreds and hundreds, that was like 1,000 years ago, where we've not had slavery for 500 years. When in fact it's very much within the lifetime of people in this room's great-great-grandparents, even sometimes great-grandparents. And in fact, de facto slavery extended well past the Emancipation Proclamation. There were people of color being sent back into virtual enslavement all throughout the first 30 years of the 20th century, being made to work in the mines in places like Birmingham, coal mines there and elsewhere, going back to the very plantations from which their grandparents and great-grandparents had been emancipated, as sharecroppers, as tenant labor, tenant farmers, right? So in fact, slavery isn't that long ago. Segregation certainly isn't that long ago. But here's the point. We don't want to talk about it. And this is really funny that we want to tell black and brown folks to get over the past, because frankly, those of us who are white, we love the past. Absolutely flippin' love the past. How do I know that? Because some of us clearly want to go back to it. How do I know that? Because the Tea Party was a thing. And during that period when the Tea Party was a thing, you had a bunch of white folks go into rallies dressed in Revolutionary War costumes, carrying muskets and wearing powdered wigs. Okay, here's the thing. If you dress up in a Revolutionary War costume with a musket and a powdered wig, calling yourself the Tea Party, which I think is a really old-ass reference, you were in no position to lecture black people about getting over the past. That's all, right? Because by definition, you're still rocking like 1774. You got me? Right? But even now, right, we say things like, what is July 4th? Other than a reference to the past. Like, why do we still celebrate that? Independence Day, we broke away from the British a long ass time ago. That didn't happen last Friday. So why do we still set off fireworks every July 4th, right? I dare you to go up next Independence Day to like the most patriotic guy on the route, you know, with the red, white, and blue wardrobe, because that's an awesome wardrobe palette. And like a big I Heart the USA button on his hat, like flying a flag, blaring Lee Greenwood from the back of a pickup truck. I dare you to go up to that guy, tap him on the shoulder and say, yeah, this is all really nice, this is great, but when are you gonna get over it? Hope you have running shoes on, because he's gonna chase you. Although he'll probably have had enough, you know, slices of mom's apple pie that he won't be able to catch you. But my point being, we love the past as long as it makes us feel good about ourselves, right? When a current presidential candidate says he wants to make America great again, it's a reference to the past, right? It's a reference that says we want to go back to when things were great, but only great for certain people, because the time that's being remembered so fondly wasn't so great for everyone, right? So we love the past as long as it venerates us. We just don't want to deal with the ugly, but that's not how history works. You got to deal with the good and the bad and everything in between, right? And we know that, don't we? Like on a personal level. We know, like, put aside politics and race, just like you as individuals, right? We all come from families that are jacked up in one way or another, right? We all have dysfunction. We all have really messed up stuff in our families, some of which we talk about, a lot of which we never talk about, right? And the fact is, if you ever want, just as an individual, to move past your past, you have to confront it. Whether that's on a therapist's couch or whether that's with friends or a lover or a spouse or a partner, whatever it is, you've got to be willing to confront where you come from in order to get to the next place that's better. But we don't want to do that. We don't do that as individuals, and it eats us up. And we don't do that as a country, but we have to do that because the past affects the present. Inertia isn't just a property of the physical universe. It's also a property of the political and the economic universe. And here's how I know it's so important. Again, a story involving my own children, about why it's so important that we know our history and are able to articulate that and the dangers of not knowing it. So, as it turns out, our daughters are both dancers.
Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. I just hope that you've learned, you've seen, you've heard for yourself whatever this professor was trying to say. Tim Wise has been known for talking about race issues in the United States, and he addresses issues that I believe that it's important that most of us need to learn, need to understand, because it is the truth, and it is high time we find a person who calls this out. And I also congratulate the black professors who have pioneered, who have championed this, talking about this, so that we all can get to learn, so that we all can get to understand that these things happens to black folks. And now, even you as a white person who is watching this video, you might ask yourself, what part am I not doing, or what part am I doing to harm black folks? Not even black, it's all about being human being. It's all about being a human being, because this is something which we need to talk about. And as much as I understand the media might not want us to talk more about it, oh, I know it's about race and racism, and so it's not interesting, it doesn't look appealing to the audience, oh, you don't need to talk about this. But I feel like this is an important subject that you as a white parent, you as a black parent, you need to teach your kids to understand, to live with other people who don't look like them. Remember, no one is born racist, right? And it is the environment that people comes from that teaches them that, you know, oh, I'm black, you know, oh, I'm white, and there are certain advantages that I have that some folks don't have, right? So this gives you a chance to teach your kids, to make them understand the system. And I believe what Dr. Tim Wise is trying to say, he's telling the truth. Because trust me, whenever he's trying to do, he's telling the truth. And it is the truth, because he is a white person who have studied races, and he understands things which are happening. You could hear the anecdotes that he gives, the stories that he gives, the personal life that he's lived with black people. This is something that he can proudly, he can openly call out, and that's the truth, right? So people have experienced And people have talked about this, that I believe that it's also great to share what people like any racist thing they have gone through. Somebody saying that he's telling the truth. As a black doctor in South Africa, as a black doctor in the South, the tremendous amount of racism that I have experienced in the world list on my journey the number of professors who didn't want me to succeed, the classmates who didn't want me in their study groups. I will never understand a superiority complex, how I graduated at the top of my class and many of them couldn't handle the pressure. Yep, these are people sharing their lived racism experience that they have received. Somebody saying, I was raised to be not racist. This is, and it's glad that this is a white man. It's called Ben Sieba. He's saying that I was raised to be not a racist, but it took me moving to a truly integrated neighborhood as an adult and I working in very, very diverse school district for me to recognize that my internalized racism. Growing up in America, we have all internalized racist messages and images that permeate every level of American culture and society. It is so damaging, so unhealthy. We all carry these internal walls that will divide us and make us feel uneasy and afraid. Until and unless we can recognize this within ourselves and recognize the systems that perpetuate this, we will never heal our society. And until those of us in place of white privilege recognize and act upon our responsibilities to address racism, the personal and systemic, these will not change. This is the damage, the original sin that still festers at the heart of America. Because I actually say that first it begins with you accepting that you are perpetuating, that you are supporting the system that has embedded this in its culture, in its norm, be it in schools, church, everywhere, because black people have an history of people being racist against them, even inside the church. And this makes you question a lot of things, including religion, including people who are in the church, right? Somebody is also saying, I remember having a conversation a while back with my daughter, who is 25 now. She was put in an honors class in elementary school at Madison in Phoenix, Arizona. She told me that she was the only dark-skinned black girl in the class, and our teacher, Mrs. Ebram, hardly ever picked her when she raised her hands and also placed her in a table by herself in the back of the room. She was a high-performing and well-behaved student. She was no reason for teacher to do that. She was so young, she didn't understand that she needed to tell me that. But when she got older and thought about her experience, that's when she told me. I was furious. Yeah, if people could just open up, there could be a lot of stories that people could be giving relating to this, because people have stories of racism that they have experienced. I think that it's important that we having people that bring these topics and we talk about them. So I understand it begins with knowing what the problem is, and I'm glad to see, even if it's few white folks who recognize that remaining silent in a situation of injustice makes you a complacent injustice as a person who is remaining silent to this situation. Somebody said that my mother also expressed this about the scriptures. Everything is white, 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 white. I always believed as a child that somehow we were in those scriptures. Praise the Most High, TMH. Come to find out we are the scriptures. I think this is a black person trying to say this, because even in the Bible has been whitewashed. Everything, including Jesus. And Tim Wise has said this so clearly. This is the second last comment that I'm going to be reading. Somebody saying that he's telling the truth. I went to school in New York in the 60s, 70s. And what was done to me out of all the racist teachers not caring enough and kick you to the side of the cab is not going to make it show my whole life I had to suffer. When I joined the Marine Corps, it was there, and two, I can't hide from it because it's part of my history, my life. I had to struggle with my all, even now, but it wasn't for God. If it wasn't for God, it would have been totally horrible. So I don't think the teachers, I thank God for making the way for me when no one else gave me a chance. Now I wonder how many black kids has gone through what I have to go through, and I'm pretty sure it was all over United States. What these roots has been deeply rooted from the beginning. I forgive, but both the damage has already been done. It's true, and I'm glad that she forgave. But you need to understand that this is something that has been happening, and I'm proud and I'm glad of people who are coming out to share how they felt about this. Now, this is the last comment that I'm going to be reading. This is frightening, really. Imagine going to church built with the sweat, tears, and blood of other people. Imagine kneeling down and pouring out prayers and praises to God as though God approves of this horrendous treatment of the nations whose limbs were served because they couldn't meet a quota set for them, in bracket Belgians and Congolese. Imagine the tears, the sweat, and the blood shed in the process, yet the magnificent church praise God, shouting hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah to the most high. We forgive but struggle to forget. God willing, one day there will be peace on earth. Guys, tell me what you think about this in the comment section. These are presented unique stories, and I hope that you find whatever you are today. Until then, I'm gonna be seeing you in my next video. Peace, love, and harmony. Salute.